So in my last video, I went over how the 20th anniversary of World of Warcraft is going to be absolutely absurd for earning a ton of cosmetics. We have a bunch of much more rare appearances from Classic on the Time Walking vendor. We have a bunch of old mounts and pets from previous anniversary events able to easily be purchased. We have a bunch of new miscellaneous cosmetics coming with the 20th anniversary. And then we have the craziest part, which is the remakes of the tier 2 sets, including new armor sets for the classes that didn't exist back then. So there is just a ridiculous amount of new cosmetics to earn. But the 20th anniversary isn't just going to be crazy for earning cosmetics. It's also going to be pretty crazy for gearing up characters, and even more specifically, gearing up ults. And I think the best place to start is the Blackrock Depths raid, which is also where you'll be able to get the highest item level of gear during this anniversary. And if you haven't heard about this, the Blackrock Depths dungeon from vanilla is being remade into a raid for max level characters. It's going to consist of LFR, normal, and heroic difficulty, and all of these difficulties are going to follow the item levels of the season 1 raid of the War Within. So the LFR version is going to be veteran track gear, which is 584 up to 606. The normal difficulty is going to give you champion gear, which is 597 up to 619. And the heroic version of the raid is going to give you hero track gear, which is 610 up to 626. And on top of that, this is going to work like modern raids, where the first boss you defeat is, say, 1 out of 8 on the upgrade track, and then the final boss may be like 6 out of 8. So as you get further and further into the raid, the item levels will be higher and higher. And what's really interesting about this is going to consist of either completely reworked items from the original dungeon or just items updated to the higher item level. And a lot of those old vanilla items, especially from Blackrock Depths, all have a bunch of interesting procs. Like a lot of the weapons will just have random damage procs that either do like a burst of fire damage or apply like a 30-second fire dot on targets. Or some of the trinkets are pretty ridiculous in terms of like mana regeneration, or even one of the helmets has an on-use effect that transfers some of your health into mana. So a bunch of these items have really interesting effects, and being able to get them on hero track also means that some of these items may just end up being close to best in slot items or something completely ridiculous, and that wouldn't even be out of the ordinary, because if you go to the War Within right now, one of the trinkets you can get from Delves is actually one of the best in slot trinkets that a lot of the world first raiders are using, even though it's like 10 or more item levels below other trinkets they're obtaining. So there is very much a possibility that items from the Blackrock Depths raid, even though they're lower item level, can be absolutely absurd just because of the effects that are present on them. So not only are you going to be able to run this raid that also has a lot of bosses, I think it's 8 main bosses and 5 mini bosses, but there's also going to be a new currency and some new vendors tied to this raid present within the 20th anniversary. And there's going to be 3 different vendors, each one having the different gear tracks on them. So one of them is going to be the LFR vendor with the veteran track gear, one of them is the normal vendor with champion track gear, and one of them is the heroic vendor with hero track gear. And these vendors are going to sell you a majority of the loot in the raid, not all the loot, but a majority of it, for this new currency called Time Warp Relic Coffer Keys. And Relic Coffer Keys were an item you were able to obtain in the original version of the dungeon. We're not sure how you're going to obtain them in the raid version. Presumably it'll just be a currency from the bosses, but every single one of these vendors has a different version of the currencies. So if you run LFR of this raid, you would get an LFR version of this currency where you could then buy other pieces of this LFR gear. So that also means that while running this raid, you'll be getting this currency even if you get unlucky and don't get gear, to be able to also go purchase gear of the equivalent item level, which I think also means this raid is probably going to give you a lot more gear than normal raids, just because you'll have all the normal drops, but then you'll also have the currency to allow you to get even more gear. So unless you're playing on a character that already has all myth track gear, this raid will be good for pretty much all of your other characters. Any alts you want to gear up, this raid's going to be perfect for. If you're someone that's just coming back now, this is going to be perfect for gearing up. Even some people's mains, depending on how the scaling turns out on some of these items, could potentially be getting upgrades from this raid. But that's absolutely not all the places you're going to be able to get some decent gear from this event. Next up, we have all of the world bosses, and there's going to be a lot more of them. So during the 20th anniversary, there's going to be the Dragons of Nightmare. Now there's only going to be one of these up every day, so that just counts as one world boss per day, Doomwalker, Azaragos, Lord Kazak, Shaw of Anger, and Arkavan, the Stone Watcher. So this means on a daily basis, there's going to be 6 world bosses you can go defeat for loot on every single character. And not only are you just going to be getting random loot, you're going to be getting upscaled versions of loot you can normally find on all of these bosses from when they were originally content. So the Dragons of Nightmare and Azaragos give you vanilla gear upscaled, Lord Kazak and Doomwalker will give you TBC gear, Shaw of Anger will give you Mist gear, and Arkavan will give you Wrath of the Lich King gear. And as we went over with the BRD raid, having a lot of this more old school gear allows some of those more interesting effects that were present on that old gear to potentially be really strong when upscaled. For instance, in previous anniversary events, we have had the Dragons of Nightmare, Azaragos, and Lord Kazak as world bosses, and some of the items they drop are really good. Specifically, one of the one-handed maces that one of them drops has a haste proc on it that has actually been really good in the past, even if its item level wasn't super great. Now, in those previous anniversary events, you could kill all these bosses daily and get loot on every single character. Presumably that will be the same here, but we don't know what item level these bosses are going to drop. But when looking at some of the other ways we could get loot in this event and looking at the item level you can get from those, it seems that these world bosses are probably going to be dropping champion gear, which is 597 up to 619, which is normal raid equivalent gear, which especially for alts is going to be absolutely ridiculous. 6 chances at normal raid gear per day on any alt that you're trying to gear up is an absolute godsend. Now, on top of all of this, there's also going to be a bunch of daily and weekly quests that give you a cache of dark iron treasures that gives you a piece of gear. So for instance, one of them wants you to kill a handful of the world bosses. One of them wants you to complete 5 time walking dungeons, which is going to be vanilla time walking. One of them wants you to defeat the final boss of the Blackrock Depths raid. One of them wants you to complete the new Chromie scenario. All of those gives you a cache of dark iron treasures that gives you a piece of gear. Now on the PTR, all the characters I've went and checked on all of these quests on would reward me with a cache of dark iron treasures that gives a 597 piece of gear, which again is a normal item level gear. But through data mining, we can also see that there's raid finder and heroic versions of these caches. So I'm not sure if maybe going through Blackrock Depths on higher difficulties may like upgrade all these caches you can get on a weekly basis, or maybe doing more specific quests inside of different pieces of content may give you different item level caches. Not exactly sure, but on the PTR, every one of these I checked gave me 597 gear from these caches, and we also don't know what pool of loot these caches are pulling from. The fact that they're all cache of dark iron treasures makes me think that this is going to pull loot from the Blackrock Depths raid, but we're not 100% certain on that either. Now, as mentioned, one of those weekly quests is for you to go complete the new world event for this anniversary, which is revisiting the Gates of Anchorage, which is a 10 to 20 player scenario that you queue into. And this is going to be like a warped version of the opening of the Gates of Anchorage with Chromie, where there are a bunch of other enemies that shouldn't be there. There are a bunch of other bosses like Tichondrius and Kel'Thuzad as this event's bosses, but we don't actually know what type of rewards this event is going to give. We know the weekly quest for this will give you that cache of dark iron treasures to get some high level loot, but we don't know if completing this world event can give you loot or if it'll give you currencies or whatever else. We just don't know what that's giving, but there is very much a possibility that defeating the bosses in this event, say once a day or once a week, will also be giving you additional loot or maybe even more of these dark iron caches. So there is a possibility that you could get a bunch more loot through this new event. But that's all the ways in which you're going to be able to gear up in the 20th anniversary event. And keep in mind, this event is going to last over 2 months, so you're going to be able to fully gear up ults pretty easily with the gear from this anniversary event. And I think that's really exciting because you could level up a new character and just gear it up through the anniversary event, and you would primarily have normal raid item level gear. But if you also want to take it into the new BRD raid, you could get a bunch of heroic gear as well and heavily gear up a lot of ults. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.